Today, I want to talk about how families and famous addicted men currently in recovery interact, focusing on fathers and wives. And it's a little bit of a continuation of a topic we've talked about in the past, religious interactions around addiction and recovery. So I want to talk about Robert Downey Jr. Do you have an image of Robert Downey Jr., Zach? Do you have some idea about him? You were a little young when he went through his travails.
Yeah, I have an image of him. I mean, I remember that he had difficulty with drugs and then he checked himself into a rehab, I think, a few times. But for the most part, he remained successful. And I remember that he continued to thrive. I mean, he went through life difficulties, but then he came back and he sure is thriving now. And I don't think he went whole hog abstinence either.
I think the route's a little more circuitous than that. It's a little more dire on the one hand and a little more existential on the other. When we talk about, and we use the term natural recovery, there are other terms which is where people get better outside of rehab.
Right.
There's another way we talk about it, which I term existential recovery, which is that the rehab part of it, which it's rare that a famous person is going to be involved in difficulties with drugs and addiction without going through rehab. But what exactly enables a person to go through recovery, especially if they go through tons of rehab? And Robert Downey Jr., he really was an example of somebody you might call the worst addict in America. He really hit the very, very bottom and seemed unable to extricate himself. And this has all become a little bit of a news item because there's a Netflix film called Senior, spelled SR. Do you know what the significance of a title of a film being called SR period is, Zach?
We're gonna be talking about generations.
And in particular, Robert Downey Jr. is Robert Downey Jr. And Robert Downey Sr. was already a famous person before Robert Downey Jr. was invented. Robert Downey Sr. was what was called an underground filmmaker. I think they're called alternative filmmakers now, in New York City in the 1960s. And that was a whole netherworld. And in particular, it implied drugs. So Robert Downey Sr. is dead now, but Netflix just released Senior, in which Robert Downey Jr. was a strong participant, talking about his father. His father appears on screen. He's in the final stages of Parkinson's disease, and yet he's still a tremendously charismatic figure. He loved his father. He's very influenced by him. But let me just give a quick description here. As a child, Downey was surrounded by drugs. His father, a drug addict, that's a term we've learned to be cautious in applying, allowed Downey to use marijuana at age 6, an incident which his father later said he regretted. Downey later stated that drug use became an emotional bond between him and his father. Quote, "When my dad and I would do drugs together, it was like him trying to express his love for me in the only way he knew how."
It reminds me of Invisible Child. It reminds me of, it's not exactly, but it reminds me of, this was in some ways, this was a loving statement, like you're invited into my life, even though it was not exactly an adaptive kind of behavior. You don't really give a 6-year-old marijuana. It reminds me of how Andrea Elliott talked about a crack epidemic being a way of bringing together a culture. So it was a kind of a non-adaptive, non-social way of saying, I love you.
let me translate that. What we're going to talk about is how the same people can be called both the cause of an addiction and the solution to an addiction.
That's a good translation.
And giving the person the love and the ability to overcome it. They love, and in the senior of film, again, the title is SR. That's what the title is. They loved each other, and eventually they both, the term they use is cleaned up together, which is something else that you and I have learned to look carefully at. So Robert Downey Jr. did grow up in a very sophisticated environment. He took drugs at an early age, but he was also an extremely successful actor from a very early age. And in that sense, he was a privileged person. I'm just going to read a generic description. Robert John Downey Jr., born in 1965, is an American actor and producer. His career has been characterized by critical and popular success in his youth, followed by a period of substance abuse and legal troubles, before a resurgence of commercial success later in his career. In 2008, Downey was named by Time magazine among the 100 most influential people in the world. So that's going some, isn't it? And from 2013 to 2015, he was listed by Forbes as Hollywood's highest paid actor. Wow, he's covered a lot of ground, wouldn't you say?
Not bad.
The highest paid actor in Hollywood. That's high. In 1992, he had a lot of critical success at an early age in his 20s. And in 1992, he starred as Charlie Chaplin in Chaplin, a role for which he prepared extensively. He learned how to play the violin as well as tennis left-handed. Charlie Chaplin was a talented man. You have to do a lot to imitate him. He had a personal coach in order to help him imitate Charlie Chaplin's posture. And Downey got an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor in the 65th ceremony, losing to Al Pacino. And then after that incredible success from 1996 to 2001, 5 years, from 1996 to 2001, Downey was arrested numerous times on charges related to drugs, including cocaine, heroin, and marijuana. He went through drug treatment programs unsuccessfully, which is something else that we see. Every one of these prominent people has been through all kinds of rehabs. And in 1999, he explained to a judge, quote, "It's like I have a shotgun in my mouth and I've got my finger on the trigger and I like the taste of gunmetal." He said he had been addicted to drugs since the age of 8. Well, that's a strong statement, due to the fact that his father, also an addict, had been giving them to him. In April 1996, he was arrested for possession of heroin, cocaine, and an unloaded .357 Magnum while speeding down Sunset Boulevard. That's self-destructive. A month later, while on parole, he trespassed into a neighbor's home while under the influence of something and fell asleep in one of the beds. He received 3 years probation, was ordered to undergo compulsory drug testing. In 1997, he missed one of the court-ordered drug tests and had to spend 6 months in jail. In April 2001, this is the end of that period, while Downey was on parole, 5 years into starting to get arrested, a Los Angeles police officer found him wandering barefoot in Culver City. He was arrested for suspicion of being under the influence of drugs and was released a few hours later, even though tests showed he had cocaine in his system. After this last arrest, Ally McBeal executives ordered last-minute rewrites and reshoots and fired Downey. He had made a comeback, and he was a star of the Ally McBeal show, despite the fact that Downey's character had resuscitated Ally McBeal's ratings. Wow. That was the end of his problems, though, when he was found wandering barefooted. After his last arrest in April 2001, when he knew he would likely be facing another time in jail and court-ordered rehab, I said, you know what? I don't think I can continue doing this. Now, of course, somebody who believes in the kind of recovery mythology would say, well, he's hit rock
He hit
bottom.
bottom. Yeah.
But then another way of phrasing the question is, he's been hitting rock bottom for 5 years.
Okay. Couldn't he have gone lower?
Yeah. Or when you get arrested on Hollywood Boulevard with heroin, cocaine, and a gun, and you get fired from a leading television show after you've resuscitated your career, aren't those rock bottoms?
Right. How are you rank ordering which is the bottom?
So the way you and I rephrase the question is, why at this point, relatively later in his life, was he successfully able to pull the strands of his life together and make a go of it? And he has an answer to that question. And the answer to that question is Susan Downey. He was already previously married and had a child. So his problems were interfering with his whole family life. Remember, this session is about families. His complicated connection to his father, Sr., his failure with his own first family. And he says, when he's asked, he says, oh, I entered recovery because of Susan Downey. After this last arrest, after 2001, companies wouldn't, there's a completion bond. A film company takes out an insurance policy, and if somebody can be uninsurable. And somebody who's gotten a pretty bad reputation on his own is Mel Gibson. And Mel Gibson made it possible for Downey to get back in film. He personally paid the insurance bond for the 2003 film, The Singing Detective, in which Robert Downey Jr. was a tour de force. He played a psychotic detective who was able to solve crimes around his hallucinations. And then he went on to make a number of successful films. His Kiss Bang Bang, Zodiac, Tropic Thunder, and he got another nomination for an Academy Award. Despite all the critical success Downey had experienced throughout his career, he had never appeared in a blockbuster film. I mean, all of these were critical successes. Everybody thought he was incredibly talented. And then in 2008, Downey starred in two critically and commercially successful films, Iron Man and Tropic Thunder. When he was nominated for one of the most 100 influential people in the world in 2008, Ben Stiller offered this observation about him. Yes, Downey is an Iron Man, but he really is actor man. In the realm where box office is irrelevant and talent is king, the realm that actually means something, he has always ruled. And finally, this summer, he gets to have his cake and let us eat him up all the way to the multiplex, where his mastery is in full effect. So after hitting bottom repeatedly, after marrying, after being a critical success and then not being insurable and being found wandering on the street, he's now one of the 100 most influential people in the world and the top of the box office chart in the United States. Let me talk now. I've written a memoir, my connection to the Robert Downey Jr. family. Robert Downey married Susan Downey, and Robert Downey's father is half Jewish. And obviously, that's not, Robert Downey Sr. is not an argument that people from a traditional Jewish background, he's not from a traditional Jewish background, which a Jewish family are immune from problems, including addiction. But Robert Downey Jr. did something unusual. He married a Jewish girl from Long Island, and he had a somewhat traditional wedding in a synagogue. And he attributes his life since 2005 to that marriage to Susan Downey. And I met Susan Downey's father. I happened to be in California during the high holidays, and I was staying in a hotel, not that I wasn't staying in the Hilton, but I was staying in a nice hotel. And you know, I like to chat people up. The man behind me was Robert Downey Jr.'s father-in-law. And he said to me, "Oh, Robert's very considerate, very preoccupied with family. And on the high holidays, which is the Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah for Jews, he flies me and Susan's mother in always to celebrate the holidays." And I thought, now even I was trepidatious about mentioning something like, "So your daughter helped your son-in-law quit drug addiction, huh?" So that topic never came up. All I had to do was reflect on how this nice man was staying in a moderately nice hotel because his son-in-law wants the whole family to be together. Somehow, family was both the source of Robert Downey Jr.'s addiction. I mean, his father introducing him to drugs. He wasn't even a preteen. And his father was a hard man to measure up to. He was just like a kind of shining light on his own. At the same time, his father quit drugs around the same time his son did. And Robert Downey had failed his first marriage, but he tuned into the second marriage. And that became the bastion of his, what people call sobriety.
This is one of those times that the question you asked me, the reflective question, was exact. I thought you were going exactly here. I think I got it right this time. In other words, there was even though it wasn't an adaptive way of being a dad or saying "I love you" or being together as a family, Robert Downey Jr. does remember and admire the effort of his father to be together with him, to share moments with him. And Robert Downey Jr. is saying, "I'm a mature adult and I have the resources, so I can do this. I can make a more reasonable, life balanced way of getting our family together and showing appreciation."
And that it comes out just within this month. People who see the film Senior cried because his connection to his father is so intense and loving. It's led to such, if you're wandering around with a gun barefoot in Hollywood, you're ready to shoot yourself. And now he's a happily married guy who flies his parents-in-law in for Rosh Hashanah, and he's making a tributary film for his father, who has since died. One of the complexities of life. But if we're in the life process program, we take people's families as we find them. They're a part and parcel of the package. They're obviously connected to the issues, and that's something you deal with all the time when you deal with children. But they're a part and parcel of the solution. And so Robert Downey Jr. is both the victim and the ultimate beneficiary of his father.
Isn't that incredible?
Life's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, say what you mean by existential journey.
And now let's talk about another news item, another name that most people will be vaguely aware of, Hunter Biden. People may be aware that Congress has just switched from the Democrats to the Republicans. At the same time, the Republicans face a number of problems. They just lost the senatorial election in Georgia that they sort of should have won. They don't know how to respond to ex-President Trump. And Donald Trump is being investigated for a host of problems, secreting, stealing government documents, his possible involvement in the insurrection on January 6th. And when Republicans are asked what they're going to investigate when they take office, when they become the majority party in the House of Representatives, they have one answer, and it might seem bizarre. Hunter Biden's laptop. Do you know what Hunter Biden's laptop is, Zach? It's kind of a
Yes.
meme.
Yes, I understand. I understand the Hunter Biden laptop thing. That's
Because
the
what it's got on it, of course, I haven't seen it. I don't know who has seen it. There are two things that people are looking for on it, which is Hunter Biden roaming around in the nude, because it's hard to say, he went more rock bottom than Robert Downey Jr., and secret connections and communications to political forces. Hunter Biden, while he was in the midst of his various addictions, was getting paid a great deal of money by Ukraine and China as a consultant, particularly around mining operations. And Hunter Biden went to the University of Pennsylvania, and I think Yale Law School, but he doesn't know anything about mining. And so the insinuation, which they want to investigate, is that he was influencing his father, which Joe Biden denied, who was vice president of Barack Obama. His father denies copiously that his son had any influence over him. But some people might say, should your son really be dealing with foreign governments? So what's the relationship between Hunter Biden and his father? Joe Biden is a famous loving parent. Hunter Biden had an older brother, Beau Biden, who was a superstar. He was the attorney general of the state of Delaware, and people thought he would be governor and run for president, and he died of a brain tumor. Hunter Biden and Beau Biden survived the traffic crash where Joe Biden's first wife and young daughter were killed. And so he was a devoted parent to those two boys, and they were very close to one another. But kind of Beau Biden, dare I say this, was the good son. There's also, they also had a daughter, Ashley Biden. Beau Biden died, as did the infant daughter, small daughter. Joe Biden has two surviving children, Ashley and Beau Biden, Hunter Biden, and both of them have been in and out of rehab. And we could spend a century thinking, why? How is that possible? But let's move on. And Joe Biden is Mr. Goody Two-Shoes. Nobody's ever accused him of cheating on either of his two wives. After Beau Biden died, Hunter became involved with Beau Biden's widow. And he lived with her while he was going through a period of intense deconstruction, where he was roaming the country, spending money on drugs, was getting arrested for petty crimes, was going to rehab, sometimes lived in single-room occupancy hotels. It's an incredible story. And he was disrupting two families because Beau Biden's widow had one daughter and he himself had three daughters. How did that work out? Well, unbelievably, those four older teenage daughters, the four granddaughters of Joe Biden, are all kind of remarkable women. They were interviewed on 60 Minutes, and all of them is a distinctive, bold, different. They're very diverse. You know, one's an athlete, one's a fashion kind of person. And we know a little bit about their granddaughters because the oldest one is named Naomi. And she lived, she's the first case of a granddaughter living in the White House, and she just got married in the White House, which has never happened before. And she herself is a prominent attorney and a political force. The Biden family's been all over the map, wouldn't you say? And in the meantime, the reason the United States is the United States today because of Naomi Biden, because she called a family meeting when Joe was considering running for president, and all four of those granddaughters and the rest of the family agreed that Joe Biden should run for president. And that is an act of such bravery. I mean, I'm a guy with a fair amount of guts. Do you want to put yourself out in front of the public when you're aware that your father has deserted both your mother, who sued him, Hunter Biden, for wasting all kinds of money on you can guess what, and then married his brother, lived with his brother's widow, and then deserted her. And yet all four of the daughters of those two families endorsed Joe Biden running for president. Whew. Hunter Biden has a new wife, and I think two children with that wife. And Hunter Biden credits that new wife for his sobriety, for his recovery. And he'd been in a ton of rehabs. And this is how it happened. His wife's name, Melissa Cohen. There's a Jewish connection here. It so happens both of these men are married to Jewish women. And maybe the best way to point about that is they're both, maybe that indicates a kind of a certain family orientation that characterizes Jewish families. And he wrote a memoir now, Hunter Biden. He credits his wife, Melissa Cohen, for his sobriety. In March 2019, when he was living in a single occupancy hotel, Hunter Biden, quote, was done with the world of politics and figuring out how to go out on the campaign trail with that. When your dad's running for president and was like, that's a little, and your brother Beau was attorney general and was going to run for president, that's a certain amount of pressure on some people. I was tired of figuring out how to go out on the campaign trail with dad, who he loves, as I would have in any other election year. He writes, quote, I was a crack addict and that was that. In 2019, he had been asked to vacate a hotel room in Los Angeles where he's living. Hunter Biden was living in some kind of shady hotel room. But before he left, he befriended some people at the pool. And they gave them the number of a South African filmmaker named Melissa Cohen. And so Hunter Biden had a blind date. And this is how Hunter Biden became sober. In 2 sentences. An hour into their first dinner, they declared their love for one another. Might be a little precipitous. Right now, they're still successfully married. I believe they have 2 children. An hour after that, Biden told Melissa he was a crack addict. You know, he was well into his 40s. I think he's about 53 now. She said, not anymore. You're finished with that. How did Hunter Biden stop being a crack addict after one sentence by a blind date on his first date? I mean, one thing that reminds us of, I think we often talk about my Uncle Ozzie, who smoked cigarettes 4 packs a day for 25 years of his life until he was 42. And then one day he went out for lunch with his fellow worker. They raised the price of cigarettes 35 cents. And she says, look at Ozzy, he's a sucker for the tobacco companies. And Ozzy said, you're right, I'm going to quit smoking. She said, can I have that pack of cigarettes? He said, no, I'm not going to waste 35 cents. And he never smoked again. And
it's as practical as deciding not to. It's as like Disney ending, Disney movie ending, as I can imagine Hunter Biden being, in a shipwreck and being washed into shore and all of the things that tormented him before, some woman saves him and pulls him up and all the things that tormented him before. And, he could never make a life. He says, I'm this. And she said, no, now, let's get dried up. Let's start a new thing.
Good imagery. The way I think about it is Ozzy and Hunter Biden have been preparing for recovery for the last 20 years.
Right. Yeah. I'm with you there too.
They just didn't get around to it. And who can say why that is? Why I call it existential is all of a sudden the threads of people's existences come together where they're feeling strong enough. There's some motivation. There's some set of values that maybe they've been trying to realize. Ozzy, my uncle, didn't want to smoke in front of his son and his daughter, but he never quit. His hands were filthy from smoking unfiltered cigarettes. He thought it was a disgusting habit, but he never quit. But then one day he did quit.
I still like my metaphor because he goes onto the ship with all of the pre-planning, and he wipes ashore realizing, holy God, this is life, and right. It's like,
here I am. I'm ashore and I'm dry and I'm alive. Is there a beautiful woman who's been captured by the pirates in that story, or no?
Who knows? I'll write it.
And somehow he says, okay, Hunter Biden wasn't a good family man on the one hand, and now he's formed a new family. And in all of these stories, the thing that I have the hardest time thinking through is, and we often talk, well, who had a traumatic upbringing? Hunter's mother was killed, but look at his daughters. He left them high and dry. Their mother is suing him for, stealing and wasting all the family money. He wrecked two families, the one daughter of Beau Biden. And yet all four of those girls are incredibly strong and tough. And they want their family to succeed. How did they manage it?
Mm.
So we're back to the mysteries of the family. It's the way we began this. How families are both the victims, the causes, and the resources of strength that allow people to become all that they want to be, even as they may have failed continuously or for decades going into them.
It to be more clinical and less visual. I guess in Robert Downey Jr.'s case, you might imagine motivational interviewing, a reflective dialogue that says family is important to you. Yeah, but dad gave me marijuana. That was his version of it. Yeah, but you're one of the biggest stars in Hollywood now. Do you still talk to your dad? Yeah, his family's still important. You might imagine getting him to the end of that. He did it naturally, but you might imagine getting him to the end of that conversation and saying, so, can you preserve what's there? Can you make it better? What is your responsibility? In Hunter Biden's case, there's also a trick in motivational interviewing that just sort of happens through the dialogue, that once in a while, you don't want to start making suggestions, because chances are those suggestions are things that have been rattling around in somebody's mind already. So you don't want to say, well, have you ever thought about, and then it's easy to get into a pessimistic slide where, yeah, I've thought about that, but here's the thing.
Have you ever thought about how you're damaging your daughters?
Right. Conversely, once in a while, you get to a point where you're starting to kind of make sense out of all the things at play. And I can imagine Hunter Biden having the voice in his head already, like, you know, I'm 50 or whatever he was. I would really like to be able to improve this. There's a lot going on, but I would really like to get out of this mudslide. And then somebody who he imagines, this could be somebody I'm with. Maybe there's another chance. He's already in that situation, and they say, nah, not anymore. Casually. That's just like that's a validation of the voice that's going on in his mind, trying to make sense of all of these things. And it also happens to incorporate family, takes care of a couple problems at once eventually.
It's like in the same way that the woman said to Uncle Ozzy, you're a sucker for the tobacco companies. She became the funnel for all of the strands of his thought. And she did it with a kind of a confidence. So you're a person who works with families. Is it fair to say that you never go into a situation and you can't get discouraged? You're the helper. You're not the particular victim. But you can ever say to yourself, oh my God, they're doomed, this family. Can you?
No.
How do you?
I never think that. I just never think that. What do you do? Everybody drinks the cyanide, or you keep trying to improve and make things good. I mean, it's like, I don't know. And I can't imagine that alternative. I can't see any benefit, and never have. I guess it's part of my DNA, but so to speak. But I can't imagine another way of thinking other than here's how it might be fine. And here's what we can do to be productive.
So that's one reason why you would never be a great trauma therapist.
Right.
Every part of your DNA is against, let's figure out how Robert Downey Sr. really fucked up Robert Downey Jr., that's not a hard thing to do in this case. With Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, you'd have to work harder. You know what I mean? Or you could go back to the trauma of being in the car. But then, of course, you'd have to say, well, how did Beau Biden become a war hero? He served in Afghanistan, and Attorney General, and Hunter Biden, not so much. How did the two of them differ? You can try and nail down all the causes of trauma and misery and addiction, but that's not your bill of fare. Your bill of fare is, well, this guy's lived 50 years. He's got some problems. That's not a magical discovery. And I am in this job to help him deal the best way he can with the values and strengths he has, which are considerable. He's an educated man with great family resources, to proceed into the twilight in a positive way.
You'll like this. I don't know if I'll keep this in the podcast or not, but I was at a meeting yesterday actually with a family whose son was on a real tailspin. But I think I had a really good understanding of what set him on a tailspin, and I didn't think it needed to be that way. So I worked with him a lot. I mean, I spent a lot of my day with him at the beginning of the school year, a student of mine. And one of the first interactions he and I had, well, first of all, he put a wall up between people trying to help him and him. And he would put this wall up by, putting the people, adults or kids, down. Oh, shut up, you idiot, get away from me, whatever it was. And the first time I talked to him, I started writing with a pencil on paper some of the things he was saying. And he went like this. And I said, you don't like that sound? And I said, no, I hate the sound of pencils on paper. And so I said, I asked him how we could change. I tossed the pencil. That's what it was. It was almost like this is hilarious. What a goon. Why is he throwing things? And we switched to some method that he would be okay with. Then I asked him about I said, that bothers me too. It's funny because I would much rather write with a pen. Is there something that works for you? So we went from there, and noticed there's other kind of sensory issues that he has. This has been a point of contention or difficulty for his parents. How do we get him from to stop being so overwhelmed by sensory stuff, or this is bogging him down, or but that was my inroad with him. And from then on, we made this relationship that he knew that I was there to understand him and really not much else. I was curious about him. So now I spend about 5 minutes a day, if that, talking to this kid. Yet we were at this whole team meeting of people who provide him services, and he's doing really, really well. And all the kid can tell his parents about is, Mr. Rhodes did this today, and Mr. Rhodes said this today. And the team was thinking, like, who cares about Mr. Rhodes? Who cares about that guy? He sees you like just a second a day. And his parents said, yeah, no, he really appreciates that. I see him in passing, and I'll say, how are you doing? He says, good. And he tells me about his accomplishments. And I say, of course you did that. I'm proud of you, and you should be. The reason I say that is because if you can capitalize on optimism and understanding and just seeing people as having the ability to move forward, and you believe that, it actually really cuts down on a lot of the work that you need to do otherwise. You don't have to turn it into a quantum physics equation.
It makes you into a little bit of a magician, and we need to give you credit. And, Susan Downey and Melissa Cohen, they had a special magic, maybe for one person, but you have some ability of spreading that kind of optimism and acceptance to an awful lot of people that you meet. So I'm going to end this little podcast with a doffing my cap to your skill set, and hoping that we can spread that kind of optimism in place of finding out people's sore spots.
I will interrupt and get the last word, but what is Hunter Biden's wife's name? I already forgot it. Melissa
Cohen.
Yeah, those things happen naturally. Melissa Cohen probably wasn't. Melissa Cohen on her own wasn't the savior of Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden had been doing the hard thinking about what he wanted to do in his life. So as a helper, if somebody's watching or listening to this and they think, how do I help a person? That's the anecdote that I shared. The meaning of that was that you try to figure out the way in which you can be the Melissa Cohen for somebody. You don't have to teach them how to think about their problem necessarily, but you can be the validating voice that helps guide them away from their problem toward what they're already how they're already thinking productively. So that's sounds like the message.
Yeah. One thing we do, Melissa Cohen probably never met any other crack addicts.
Right. Good point.
And she's a filmmaker. She's not a counselor.
Right.
But Melissa Cohen doesn't have here's how you cure crack addicts protocol. She has a human being protocol. And what you're saying, which is great, has professional counselors, has the psychiatry of medicalizing addiction treatment really helped that much? Or is human quality and human context still the essential ingredient for all recovery?
Oh, I'm not going to improve on that open-ended question there. So I'll say happy Sunday and thanks again, Stanton.
My pleasure. Talk to you later.